Are you wondering how to use a knife sharpener properly? Well, today I'm going to show you how to sharpen this Santoku knife on the Viper Sharp. So stick around, let's jump in and give you some details. When it comes to the details of how to use a knife sharpener, every system is going to be similar in some ways. For example, when you clamp the knife, you want to follow this line at the front of the clamp with an imaginary line between the heel and the tip of the blade. And so let's take a ruler here, and if we see right there, and this is a fairly straight blade, but basically we want to go from heel to tip like that, and then the clamp should follow that line as much as possible. So notice how that clamp, the front of that clamp, is perpendicular with the ruler. Okay, so that's one of the first things you want to do when you are setting up the knife, is make sure that you've got a fairly straight imaginary line there, that you're following that imaginary line. So your clamp is not set straight with the handle, but rather based on heel to tip lining. Okay, so that is going to give you the most consistent angle from one end of your blade to the other. And then we'll put the clamp into the system. Now, with systems other than the Viper Sharp, that's not necessarily possible. The clamp will already be in the system or part of the system, and you don't have the ability to move that. So that's the first step in how to use a knife sharpener. The next thing we want to do is take a Sharpie marker along the edge. This is going to mark your edge for you. Color the entire edge with the Sharpie. That will show you where the edge is and show us our angle there. The next step is to set your length for the stone. With the Viper Sharp system, we have a lock ring here that will prevent this tail of the stone from coming up over the top of your blade. And so we want to put that on there to keep it from going up over beyond the edge. And then we want to have one back here that will prevent the top of the stone from coming down on the front side and then allowing you to come back up and nick the edge. And so you'll set those lock rings in place. Now the next thing we want to do is see if we can take off that marker, and so we've got to use a lighter stone, generally a 1200 would be a good grit to put on here, just to see where we're taking the marker off. We want to apply a little bit of oil to the stone. Keep the stone clean as you're working, so clean it off periodically, but leave a little bit of oil on it there. Then we can adjust the angle. So with the Viper Sharp, we do that from the back there. So adjust your angle until you feel like you've likely got the same angle as your edge, and then take a few passes on it. And I like to do that on all the way along the blade. Now, one thing I'll say here is you will often see variances in the factory edge of the blade. So you might see a different angle back here at the heel or a different angle at the tip or both when you're first sharpening a knife that is coming from the factory. So right now that gives me the most consistent angle there. You can probably see how the marker has come off there, and all the way along the edge we have the marker coming off. So what that means is the marker is being removed all the way to the apex or the very edge of the knife, and so that means that we are at the right angle to remove the metal the way we want to, so that we're at a consistent angle. So that's going to give us a consistent angle for this knife from heel to tip. Now I do see some variation in the blade there, and that's probably just from manufacturing, and so we need to go in and just make sure that everything is the same angle. Depending on the type of metal you're working with, you'll need to go to either a 250 or a 400 grit when you're initially profiling the blade. So we're going to go ahead and try a 250 here on this one. The 250 will give you the most aggressive work, removing the most metal. So if you feel the need to reprofile a blade to make sure that you're getting the exact same angle from heel to tip, 250 will get that work done quickly, especially when you're working with the diamond stones, which we are here. I'm using a back and forth circular motion. Doesn't really matter what direction you do it, as long as you're moving back and forth. It can be up and down, just a straight back and forth like this, or it can be a circular motion. I typically end up with a circular motion. And I see a little bit of variation in that tip over there, so I'm going to work on that so we can try and even out the blade. Now, another thing that I notice with this blade, and you might see this with your knives, but as I look at that, let's see if we can get some contrast under here. So this knife looks like it's got a fairly consistent angle, slight curve from the heel right up to about here in the belly of the blade, and then it looks like it's just got a slight straightening right there, and so it's a little bit of an indent at this point in the blade. Can you see that? So we've got fairly straight here, we've got a little bit of a curve in the belly, and then we're coming back to straight and then sticking out just a little bit here. So there's, what it ends up doing is giving a little bit of an indent there. And it's very slight, but that's what I feel like I'm seeing here, because then as you sharpen, you're going to see more of the edge out here in the belly and out here on the tip than you do right there. That's because of the actual shape of the blade. And so the only way to make this consistent from heel to tip is to remove more material out here so that you get that consistent edge there. So that doesn't have as much to do with manufacturing as it does to do with more to do with manufacturing than it does to do with sharpening. It doesn't have as much to do with sharpening as it does to do with manufacturing. So when the blade was manufactured, it had that slight imperfection in the design there. And so that's fairly easy to work out. I'm just going to do a little extra work out on the tip to bring that even. So if you see inconsistencies when you're sharpening your knife with that edge, it just needs a little extra work. That's all you need. You just give it a little extra work, a little extra love. And then you'll bring that out to consistent. So I'm seeing a little bit of that back here on the heel as well. So we're going to give a little extra work on that heel. So with this knife, that slight imperfection being worked out is one thing we need to think about, and then I think overall just make sure that you've got a good amount of work from heel to tip, that you're really working that all the way. Now what we're looking for is to apex that blade, so we want to check for a burr on the underside. Now a burr is when you're creating the edge, you've got the edge of your knife here, and when you're going back and forth on this, the metal at the very apex will actually fold over, and then you can feel that burr, and you can hear it as well. So let me see if you can hear this one here. So you've got a burr from the heel here all the way through up to here for sure. But right there on that tip, you'll notice a different sound and a different fill because the burr isn't there, which means we haven't apexed that edge. And if you look at the edge, here's one of the benefits of the Viper Sharp, being able to remove that clamp. So if we look at that edge all the way along, we can see a fairly consistent shape until we get right out there to that tip. And then things start going different, right? And it's visible. You can see a fatter portion right here and a narrow portion right there. And really what's going on is just the manufacture of that blade right here. It's not apexing right there at that edge. It's a different angle. So again, one of the benefits of the Viper Sharp knife sharpener is you can take it out like that, put it back in the system, and it's not going to cause any loss of angle there. So we keep working on that edge. Now remember, and I'm going to clean this stone a bit, so we'll add a little oil here. Take a clean rag, well, cleanish rag. We'll wipe that oil away. Add a little more. so that we're leaving some oil on there. It's better to use a lint-free rag than to use a towel, paper towel, or something like that will leave lint. So remember, what we're trying to do is create that burr, and that burr is created when we pull back away from the spine of the knife. And so that circular motion, or that back and forth motion, is going to be the best to help us create that. And we need to completely apex. So what we're really doing here with this knife initially is what we call reprofiling. We're creating a new profile to the edge from heel to tip, one end to the other, to make sure that the entire length of the blade is given the same profile, the same angle. And we're still missing that right out there at the very tip. How long this takes depends on the hardness of the metal. Diamond stones are the best way to go. They're harder than anything on the planet, so they're going to cut through anything. So it'll definitely be a lot faster to use the diamond stones than it will be to use a ceramic when you're reprofiling especially. Ceramics are great for polishing, the higher grit ceramics. But when you're trying to remove a lot of metal and create that apex, you want a coarse diamond stone for that. And that looks like we're getting there. I'm starting to feel a little bit more of a... So this is a heavy burr. This is a light burr. So we are getting there. And if you want to flip the knife over, you can do that. You don't have to work one side all the way to the apex. We could flip that over. And we can come over here and work this side of it. And here you can really see the difference in that tip. In fact, I'm going to show that, bring that up here. So and look at that angle. We've got a little bit of marker on there, a little bit of that marking. But as we look at that, you can really see that this tip has quite a different angle on it, and that's from the manufacturing of the knife. So we just have to work it long enough until we get the same angle. Now, placement of the clamp is also important. This is an important aspect of how to use a knife sharpener, is to make sure that you're placing that clamp correctly. So we've talked about the imaginary line from the heel to tip, but the other thing to keep in mind is we want to be centered between the blade and where we're working. So if we're using, this is what, 6 or 7 inch Santoku knife here, 6.5 inch blade, and so we want to be fairly centered between that 6.5 inches. Okay, that's going to give us that center of the blade, and then lining up the front of that clamp with the heel to the tip is going to give us the most consistent angle here. Now that we have swapped over to the other side, we've got a burr on most of this this edge here, so you're going to hear a different sound than what we just heard a moment ago. You might want to rewind and listen to that, but now you're going to hear the burr being removed, and it's going to be a much coarser, much rougher sound to it. until we remove that burr. So we do the same thing on this side, back and forth. Hear that getting finer, settling down. We're going to work that tip a lot because that tip right there needs to have a lot more material removed in order to have the same profile and the same angle as the rest of the knife. Now you can work this as much as you want or as little as you want. Right now, because of the factory angle, the factory edge that we have on this knife, we've probably apexed to the other side, but it's not going to look quite as pretty because of the way the knife was made out here at this tip. So yeah, we've got an apex there. We've got our burr all the way along, even right there at the tip. But you might notice there that tip does not look uniform in the amount of metal that's moved away compared to the rest of the blade. So if we want to uniform that, it's just a matter of removing more metal from that part of the blade that doesn't quite look uniform. And so it comes down to time, really. It's just a matter of how much time you want to spend on it. The blade, at this point, it will be sharp. The blade's going to be plenty sharp, because as long as you apex, that's what makes a blade sharp. If you're apexing the blade, you remove the burr on both sides, then your knife is going to be sharp. But if you want the edge to look uniform, then basically what you got to do is find those skinny areas, those areas where it doesn't look quite as wide, and work that more until it gets to where it looks more uniform. And it's pretty typical for something like that to happen with a tip. You'll especially see things like that with more curved blades. The straighter the blade is, the more uniform it usually will look. But that's all we're dealing with here, is just the angle, and that factory angle. Unless you've got a slight bend in the blade, and that can cause stuff like that as well. And I'm not sure that we have that with this one. I think it's fairly straight. Yeah, I don't feel like we have a bend in that blade anywhere. So it's just a slight variance in the angle that's happening there. And the way to take that out is just to work, give it more time on that tip out there, removing more metal. Until that looks the way you want it and matches the rest of the blade. We've got a great apex there. We've got a great burr. Once you've got that burr, then that's where you're going to use this knob on here, and that's why I've kept it loose. So you can start down here, and just with one swipe, we're going to remove that burr. So now we're going to go forward and upward on this using as much of the stone as possible. So notice we start at the top of the stone and we end up using almost all of that stone. You want to be careful not to bring this over the top of that, or you are going to scratch that blade, the blade face. But this removes the burr and allows you to finalize the edge. And so from here, now that we've created the apex, we've created the burr on both sides, now it's just a matter of removing that burr with subsequently higher grits. You can do an apex if you want to from one grit to another, but it's not necessary at this point. So now we'll move up to a 400. This is a new 400 stone, so it may feel a little, give a little more room there, a little more coarse. They'll settle into their true grits after you use them a bit. And you don't have to go to each grit. So I don't have to necessarily use the 400 and then the 600 and then the 1200. You can go straight from a 250 to a 600 and then up to the 1200 if you'd like to. And I think we're going to do more of that here, honestly. The 600 and 1200 are going to just clean up those striations on there for us. So put the, all right. And I like to start from the heel and move forward. A lot of times, mostly just to avoid damaging the scales of the blade. But my hand likes to move from left to right, and so I'll do a little bit of both of those. But that really cleans up those striations and scratches in the blade there, in your edge. I'm still seeing a smaller amount of metal on that tip, but we're definitely sharp. So those variations that you see in how much metal is moved is generally just from the shape of the blade, the manufacture of the blade. If you have two clamps, you can put one back here and one up here and work a much smaller area of the blade, and that might help to clean up those variations. Remember to keep your stone clean. That's an important aspect when we're talking about how to use a knife sharpener. You want to make sure that you're not building up a lot of grit, a lot of metal filings in your stone there. So I've given several cleaning passes going just against the blade with the 600 grit. And we're cleaning it up pretty good, but I am certainly seeing that variation in the blade shape. So there's definitely, I don't know if you call it a flaw, it's just the design of the knife perhaps, but there is basically the tip here almost comes back forward. This curve that we have from here on up is not following the same curve. It straightens out right here. And so that tip is going to look different, until you spend enough time to remove enough metal to continue that curve on up. And we probably honestly need to move it up to about there and bring that curve up slightly, and that's what's going to get rid of that variation in there. I'm not going to do that much work on this blade here, but that's what would need to be done if you wanted to remove all those variations. Sometimes reprofiling a blade can be some serious work. Now that we're down to the 1200 or up to the 1200 grit, I'm going to give a little extra polishing, circular polishing here. The more time you spend with this grit, the shinier you can get there, but you can also use lapping films to really shine up that edge and finalize those, removing those striations and finalize the edge. So if you want a mirrored edge, the lapping films are the way to go. So I'll probably do a little bit of that for you here just so you can see what that can do for the edge there. But that is a pretty refined edge with the 1200 here already. Give another pass. Over there. A few passes that direction. A few final passes in this other direction. And that's got that pretty cleaned up. So now just a little bit of polishing, but let's test it. We'll grab a piece of paper here, and when you test it, you want to get as close to that heel as you can and run all the way to the tip of the blade. What we're looking for is anything that grabs. So it's not so much about cutting through the paper as it is seeing if there's anything that grabs. We can cut through the paper, no problem, right? But we don't want to do our cutting all with just this part of the blade. We want to use the entire blade. And so when you get a smooth cut from one end to the other, then you know that you've sharpened every bit of it and you haven't missed anything. So that's nice and sharp, and of course you could test it with shaven hair at this point. And that again you want to test on different parts so that you can see that it's sharp all the way along. Now I've made a nice mess on my workstation here. So we've got a nice sharp knife, but if we want to take it to that next level and do the lapping films, then we can put a lapping plate in here and run that. So we'll put the lapping plate in the system. With lapping films, you generally want to start at the base of the stone or the lapping plate holder and just pull away from the edge, away from the blade, so that you're not cutting into the film itself. Be sure to lift that each time. Lift up so that you're not going this direction with the lapping film. And you'll start to see that shine really come onto the blade edge. We have different lapping films at vipersharp.com, so you can choose how fine you want to go with it. Lapping films move in the opposite direction. A 1 is finer than a 9, where with your stones 1200 is the finest, 250 the most coarse. This won't be near as awkward when you're doing it without a camera tripod in the way. And it wouldn't hurt to clean the lapping film now and then as well. That's what happens when you go the wrong direction. Your nice sharp blade will bite into that lapping film.